So this is called the Turn Against Overtourism, the Turn Against brackets over close brackets tourism. My name is Austin Williams, Future Cities Project, etc., etc. I'm chairing this session, and I've asked the speakers to do just a 3-minute intro, very, very brief, short, punchy, and then I'll come straight out to yourselves if you have any comments or questions you want to ask. Just to give you a bit of background, the last year on the tourism conversation, there were campaigns in the Netherlands that saw anti-tourism being at the forefront of a kind of a revulsion against too many people coming into Holland. Holidaymakers sprayed by water pistols in Spain. Venice has a pedestrian congestion charge. The Maldives just last week has introduced a departure tax. So you can go there on holiday, but you can't leave. Prague has banned pub crawls. This is our audience, isn't it? To attract, quotes, more cultured tourists. And then closer to home, so tourism kind of covers multifacets. There's a British headline recently, 2 weeks ago, clueless tourists are ruining the Scottish Highlands for the rest of us. And another headline in Devon and Cornwall said, holiday lets are depriving communities of much needed housing. So there's a lot to kind of get our teeth into here. Is tourism a problem, the problem, or actually is it a necessity? Is it actually a benefit? So to discuss this, we've got a really good panel. Jim Butcher, starting off there on far left, is Reader of Geography of Tourism at Christchurch, Canterbury University. He writes the Tourism Horizon Substack and is the author of Volunteer Tourism, the Lifestyle Politics of International Development. Next to speak will be Katie Glass in the middle. She's a feature writer. Most famously, just speaking to her earlier, her article on the post office scandal inspired the TV documentary. She's too modest to say so, but for the purpose of this panel, she's an award-winning travel journalist. And then we have Emma Zaoli is from Spain. You know, they come over here. Anyway, she's an international relations student. She's been a Spanish delegate to the United Nations Youth Assembly in New York, and I'm sure she will raise in some way, shape or form concerns about tourism to Barcelona and Madrid, but we'll see what happens. Okay, that's your panel. Going to crack on with Jim. 3 minutes. I'll be fairly brutal with you, and then we'll come out to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I wanted to say a little bit about where this word overtourism came from, because it hasn't been around too long. It started really in 2017-18 with some protests in Barcelona organised by an anarchist youth group called Aran Jovent. The protests were incredibly small. In some cases, 2 or 3 people jumping on a tour bus for people going on a tour to the Nou Camp Stadium, throwing paint around and so on. I think the biggest they managed was about 30 people on a beach. However, this term, within 6 months, certainly within a year, became part of the language of the United Nations World Tourism Organization, the World Economic Forum, numerous NGOs, and virtually every geographer that I know commissioned a book on it straight away to say how terrible tourism was. I was the exception to that. Anyway, very, very quickly, in 2018, the term began to be applied very, very widely. And some of the various things have been mentioned there. Dubrovnik, Thailand, the Isle of Skye, very, very different kind of places, Venice, Edinburgh. Jump forward to today, we've had protests a little bit bigger, not much bigger, depending who you listen to, between about 3,000 and 8,000 people behind a banner saying mass tourism kills the city. Organised by the Neighbourhood Assembly for Degrowth. Okay. How popular are these kind of ideas within Barcelona itself? How far do they represent a kind of bottom-up, if you like, populist sentiment amongst the ordinary people? Fortunately, the Barcelona government published a very handy yearly opinion poll, which gives us some insight into this. Last year, when they did this poll, 71% of people said that tourism was beneficial versus 17% against. For Catalonia as a whole, 83% of people said it was beneficial against 8%. 61% of people did say that Barcelona was close to the limits that it can take. And this is what I'm using Barcelona as an example here, and other places can be very, very different to this. 36% of people said Barcelona should attract more people, and 50% of people said the region round and about should attract more, with 30% against. Only 13% of people thought that tourism was a major contributor to antisocial behaviour, And perhaps surprisingly, only 16% of people thought it was a substantial contributory factor in apartment prices, which has obviously been a very important thing. So we have to put these things in crisis, but I've no doubt tourism being a kind of unique industry that involves people travelling and accommodation. You buy any other product, or if countries export any other product, it travels from one to another. You don't have that kind of cultural encounter. So there are very real issues there. But I think we have to put these things in the context of an industry that's brought a lot of incredibly good things, that's helped cities like Barcelona transition, and deal with the sort of deindustrialization that they were going, that was happening regardless of tourism. And I really think when we approach these questions, we've got to try and have our cake and eat it, have tourism and address some of the negative things, not one or the other. And I think that's the problem with some of the debate.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Very good. Okay. If you would, Katie.
Well, first of all, I feel like a bit of a fraud because unlike the sort of academics on here, I'm really just someone who likes to go on holiday. So that's how I kind of come at this debate. So I guess I hear the word over-tourism and I just immediately think snobbishness. To me, it just smacks of that sort of John Kerry's The Intellectuals and the Masses, where we know travel was once something only some people could afford to do. Now everyone can afford to do it. You know, the people who used to be able to do it don't like it very much. So once truly travel was a sort of idea of the grand tour. It was a sort of very rich people could afford to do it. It was a rarefied, rare sort of commodity that you would get to go on these wonderful, see the world. And then in the 50s, with the rise of the sort of package holidays, suddenly it was available for more people. So the middle classes started to travel too. Much more recently, really, in only the last few decades, with the advent of package holidays and initially platforms like Airbnb, suddenly travel became much more widespread. And actually the people who are really traveling now are emerging markets like sort of India, China, Indonesia, Vietnam. So I think over-tourism is like now everyone can go traveling. The people who used to be able to go and have Venice themselves are a bit sort of hacked off about it. Like you said, the term over-tourism really only came out in sort of 2017. Well, what had sort of happened? This growth of the idea of over-tourism. During COVID, if you were privileged enough to live somewhere wonderful like Barcelona or Venice or Bath, you got into the idea during COVID how wonderful you got to sit in St. Mark's Square on your own. You got to walk down Las Ramblas and no one was there. And then suddenly, post-COVID, everyone wanted to come back and you didn't really like the idea very much. So again, we have this very sort of spoiled, really very privileged people living in these locations that don't quite like the idea that everyone gets to descend on them. But I'm sorry, I sort of feel that everywhere is for everyone and you haven't got the right to say, sorry, you can't visit Bath. So I guess I think there are two solutions to over-tourism. As someone who grew up, first of all, in Snowdonia and then in Bath, I'm so excited when people started going to Snowdonia in lockdown, it just sort of delighted me. And in Bath in the summer, even though it's complete hell, I'm sort of so excited to see the tourists, some of them fueled by like Bridgerton, who will be coming to the city for the first time, see the beautiful Georgian architecture. I noticed that in places like Skegness or Butlins or Disney, we don't really talk about over-tourism. And it's because the kind of people who go to those locations are used to sharing them with other people. So I have a radical solution to over-tourism, which is simply you can only go somewhere once. If you're going to Venice for the 10th time and you want to complain it's much busier than it was the first time you went there, then I'm sorry, it's time to move on. And instead of telling people, oh, you should try the island next door, you should be trying the island next door. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. Very good. And Emma, if you would.
Hi. So just to provide a little bit of context, I was born in Spain, raised in Spain. I'm half British, so I can also make the argument for British tourists in Spain. However, contrary to the belief that I'm anti-tourism in Spain, I'm actually a big, big supporter of tourism in Spain because despite some citizens, Barcelona citizens, really enjoying the feel of their streets and having it all to themselves during COVID, there was a big, big proportion of their population that suffered because they were out of a job. A lot of their population, they work in tourism and they rely on all of these tourists coming in every year and sustaining their economy. I know that Spain would not be doing well economically at all if it weren't for tourism. I think in 2023, our GDP, our tourism accounted for 12.3% of our GDP. That's an insane amount of money that's going into our economy. And that's all thanks to tourism. However, just to play devil's advocate a little bit, the reason why a lot of people in Spain, and I'm making the Spain argument because I'm more experienced to talk about this. The reason why there's so much hate against tourists and the reason why people in Barcelona were spraying people with water guns is because of the behavior that some tourists have. Now, I don't think it's snobbish to say, oh, you shouldn't be traveling and making the most of low prices. That's completely fair. That's understandable. It's, supply and demand. If the flights are there, people are going to book them. However, I think citizens are entitled to expect a degree of respect from people who come on holiday to Spain. And if you look at areas like Benidorm, if you look at areas like Magaluf, you're not seeing tourists be respectful. You're seeing tourists completely trash cities. In the words of the mayor of Galviat, which, for those of you who don't know, has Magaluf inside of it, he said, in your country, you cannot urinate in the street, walk around with alcohol, drinking as if there is no tomorrow, or being half naked. And the message is that it's the same here. Now, I wouldn't say, oh, we should completely cut off tourism in these areas of Spain, but there are measures that are being put into place to limit this and to limit the extent to which the cities are getting trashed. So, for example, I think it was in Ibiza that some bars were shutting at 10 o'clock, so you couldn't buy any more alcohol after 10 o'clock to sort of limit the extent to which people were getting drunk in the streets. So again, I think it's all about striking a balance. I think tourism is extremely important. I don't believe in limiting tourism, but I believe in trying to address the roots, which is disrespectful tourism. Now, I'm not saying Spanish people are saints either. They've probably done the same in many other locations. But I think that's where most of the hate comes from, because most Spanish people understand that there is a crucial need in Spain for tourism. And we're very welcoming of tourists. We love tourists, love practicing Spanish people love practicing their English when tourists come. So welcome tourists, just be respectful. That's my argument today.
Thank you very much indeed. Very good. So, there's a lot on the table, whether it's elite, whether it's the obverse of that, which is the fact that some tourists are rude and obnoxious. I've always found it amazing that when you do go to the south of Spain, there's so many expats, as we like to call them, actually live there. The idea that there would be that many Spanish people living in somewhere in Cleethorpes, it just wouldn't we wouldn't hack it, would we? But also, I have been to China. I've been to the Great Wall during Spring Festival, and if you want to see over-tourism by Chinese people, it's absolute hellish. You can't move for a million. Literally millions of people. So there are interesting, pragmatic, practical problems, and there's political issues at stake here. So I'm really kind of going to throw it open to you for any observations that you might have had, any personal observations or stories, or whether you think that tourism is acceptable. One of the little pieces of footage I sent to the panelists was a World Economic Forum film, which I don't normally send to people, from Davos, which actually had a piece by the South African kind of tourism officer saying, I wish we had over-tourism, but we don't. What we do have is seasonal tourism. Over-tourism is simply a lack of new, developed, exciting destinations. So, maybe it is the fact we all go to Magaluf, and maybe we should go further down the coast to experience a little bit more openness.